just hit record. Okay. Yeah, and we talked a little bit earlier about how it bleeds over into other aspects of your job search and your outreach. But let's dive in. And I should introduce myself before we get started. I'm Matt Kuchar. I started at Middlebury College in 2018. And prior to joining CCI at Middlebury, I was at Harvard Business School for about 10 years. While I was there, I helped to found the Christensen Center for Teaching and Learning. This was an organization that did a lot of pedagogical research within the MBA world. And I also served as an executive coach to faculty there. And after that, I spent 4 years at Dartmouth in their equivalent to CCI before coming to Mid. And at Mid, I run the MidtoMid program. This is a platform for mentoring and for networking. And we'll take a look at it as we get into the presentation. But since we launched in 2019, we've had over 5,500 people join. So I hope you're on there too. And if not, I hope that this is maybe an incentive for you to get started. Okay, and we're just a little slow here with my internet connection, so please forgive that. But we're talking today about networking, and I want to encourage you to think about networking as creating your own personal board of advisors. And this is something that you have been doing your entire life, and that's building alliances with friends, with academic advisors at Middlebury, with coaches, with professors. And it's a pretty easy turn to get from that to doing the same thing, but just within professional circles. And whether this is something you consider yourself really good at, or if it's something that makes you nervous, I want you to get into the habit of calling your networking contacts, your knowledge partners, or your collaborators, or your board of advisors. Sometimes when you say networking, there's something kind of smarmy and a little quid pro quo feeling about it. But this is really about creating your own personal board. We have a busy agenda for this session. This could easily be a series of workshops, but we're cramming it all into one mega networking workshop. And we're going to try to do it in about 50 minutes or so. But if you hang in with us for the whole 50 minutes, I think what you're going to find is from cradle to grave, from before you even pick up a phone or reach out to someone to following up afterward, you're going to learn everything that you need to know. And even if you're doing this already, hopefully pick up some new tricks as well. So we're going to proceed in 4 parts. First, we're going to take a look at mindset. And this is framing so that you are at your best as you're reaching out and you're ready to go and get the most from these conversations. Second is a framework. And we'll take a look at 8 real simple but powerful steps and principles that you can craft into your practice before, during, and after you reach out to people. And then third, tactics and kind of how to will fill in that framework that we develop with things that you can use practically. And then fourth, and finally, we'll take a look at both LinkedIn and MidtoMid very briefly to make sure you're getting the most out of there. So let's dive in with framework. And you see today, one of the big ahas that you'll find, not just in this presentation, but hopefully in your lives, is that the most powerful relationships that you will have as college students, as new employees afterward and moving on are mentorships. This is something that we all kind of feel intuitively, but it's something that's also borne out by research. And the Gallup-Purdue Index in 2014 was a huge study that looked at 300,000 college alumni and asked them questions about what was the most powerful part of your college experience. And surprisingly, even more powerful oftentimes than faculty and classroom learning were mentorships. Now, a mentor can be a professor, it can be a formal mentorship that you're in, or it can be a dedicated professional contact who cares about you and wants to see you advance from where you are at the present moment. Interestingly enough, people who had mentors while they were in college reported in this Gallup-Purdue study of as having more career satisfaction as they're starting their jobs, and even feeling more like elevated responses throughout all areas of well-being in their lives. They kind of rated themselves higher for how comfortable they feel in their own skins. Um, that same study shows that mentorships are rare, but my belief, whether we're talking about formal mentorships or whether we're talking about networking, which is what we're going to focus on today, is that if you approach networking right, if you approach contacts in the right way, you can get the same kind of power of that mentoring intervention through a series of networking conversations. And even though I think it is important to distinguish the two, if you use the same principles and the same approaches, I think you're going to get just as much out of networking as you can out of some mentoring experiences. That said, networking can be pretty tough depending on what your mindset is and how you're approaching it. And for some of you, it might even feel like it's as hard as, say, like singing in public. And what I found when I talk to people is that they'll often describe networking as though it's two completely different activities. And you'll have folks who look at networking and they say this is something that's intimidating, it's groveling for a favor, it's performative, it's energy draining, it feels manipulative. You're just asking people to help you, and you don't have anything in return to give them. And then you'll talk to other folks, and what they'll say is this is this creative act. It's a learning accelerator. It's a fun conversation, and it can really help level the playing field. Well, what's going on here? And I want you to think just a moment about which camp you fall into here. And what the way that I would describe this isn't about who you are as a person, but this is about your task orientation to certain things. And with networking, you can be oriented toward growth, towards advancement, toward exploration and discovery. Or you can be oriented toward kind of risk aversion and risk control and deliberation in this. Neither one is wrong. Both are necessary. But what I want you to do is just think, where do I sit in this? Am I mainly predominantly concerned with kind of controlling and mitigating risk here? And I should think about ways to stretch beyond that. Or am I really all in for a conversation, and maybe I'll need to throttle back and do some structuring and planning so that I can present my best self in through here. Thinking about networking and what's in it for you, and we're continuing with mindset here. Probably what you're thinking about for the most part is this green box, this first one here, self. And that's the most common way to do it, especially as you're getting started with professional networking or networking in service of your career. So like what Sam said with trying to find opportunities within a field he's interested in, or Kyle kind of exploring different fields because he knows what he doesn't want to do, but he's looking at other things, what he does want to do. And this is the most common way to do it. It is something where you can leverage other people's experience, get advice and perspective. And one statistic that I think is interesting to look at here for this last bullet, accessing more opportunities, is throughout the course of your career, maybe not necessarily your first move after Middlebury, but throughout the course of your career, probably 60 and up to 85% of the positions and the opportunities that you will pursue, the advancements that you'll get, the promotions that you'll receive, are not going to be listed on any sort of job listing service. It's going to be something that you get through your personal contacts, something that happens through networking and the networks that you build. So even if in being here today, your primary focus is to pursue opportunities right now, think of this as a habit to cultivate throughout your career, and think of it in terms of the strategic and operational implications. Strategic, if you have done anything with a project, perhaps with Midcore, perhaps with research for something that you're working on. And Benji, I know you're involved a lot in COVID research and some of the positioning and looking at that like geopolitical sphere. You have done this where you've reached out to create value for a project that you're on, or shop around for an idea to try to find a place for it, or even win clients and bring in business. So that would be the second bucket, strategic. And then finally, operational networking. This is really what recruiters are doing. If you've ever had occasion to talk to a recruiter, they are trying to find talent. They are trying to find resources that are going to grow an organization and help it get better. I want you to keep these buckets in mind, at least for the next slide, because what we're going to see is that while you're always operating here, or often operating here in this green bucket, the people that you're talking to, when you think about what's in it for them, might be looking at your conversation as operational or strategic. And I mention that only because sometimes it's an easy way to think, oh, I'm not imposing on this person. They're actually getting value from this at a different level than what I'm getting. So with that, what's in it for them? On MidtoMid, we regularly reach out to our alumni volunteers and we ask them, why are you doing this? Why did you raise your hand to be a mentor or be available for students who want to reach out for one-off conversations? And here's what they say. Most common thing is paying it forward. And they'll say, I was in their shoes. I was at Middlebury. Someone helped me out. And now it's my turn. I'm in a position to help them. And they really, really do want to help and they're earnest about it. They have this goodwill. They have this altruistic sense of wanting to develop your talent, develop your initiative, and see Middlebury students do well out there in the world. There are some what you could call selfish motivations. It feels great to be recognized. Think about a time when someone reached out to you for a favor or for advice, and that's what you're doing with these folks. They work hard, and it feels good to be recognized, not just within their organizations or their industry, but by someone who's outside of it who wants to reach out to them. So this is all to say, don't hesitate to reach out to people. Don't feel like you're imposing. You're actually, if you're doing it right, this is a great conversation for both parties. And finally, when you take a look at some of these higher numbers up and through here, they should look familiar. They should look like some of the strategic and operational reasons for networking down there, where a lot of our alums do want to hire mid or want to position mid students to do well. Sometimes they're sourcing ideas or things that they can use in their own work. Okay, in terms of making it matter, how do you move things forward? How do you move ahead? And we don't have to look in a lot of depth at this slide, but what I want you to keep as a visual is that when you first meet someone and you say, hey, it was nice to bump into you at the Starbucks the other day, that's a nice interaction, but it's a weak tie. And your goal when you're in these conversations and reaching out to people is to create stronger relationships or stronger ties. And you're going to do that by moving up the ladder. You can start with basic questions, something like, how do I apply for a job at your organization? It's not very memorable. It's just an exchange of information. So there's not a lot of skin in the game there. But if you did research your questions and say something like, hey, I saw that you hired 3 people with this type of background. Can you tell me why you're looking at that kind of background or that kind of person and what role they serve in your org? All of a sudden, there's a thought question that they have to engage in, and it shows that you've done your homework, and it's more of an interesting conversation. You might not always move all the way up the ladder to task interdependence. That's more for coworkers and colleagues, but just keep it as a general principle that the higher up that you can get towards helping them towards these greater exchanges, the more memorable that conversation is, and the more long-standing, more long-lasting that networking contact will be. Okay, so that's what I have to say about mindset. I know I am talking a little bit fast because we do have a lot to uncover here. But what I would say to keep in mind from this first portion of the presentation is networking is not an imposition, it's the norm. It's a huge growth accelerator, a huge opportunity, and both parties benefit. It's not just something selfish that you're doing only for you. Great. So with that, let's move into a framework. And I like to think of this as how to beat the house. As you're reaching out to people, one thing you'll find is your success rate is not going to be 100%. You're not going to get callbacks from every single person. And when you do get callbacks, when you do engage with people, not every conversation is going to take you to enlightenment. But if you follow these 8 steps, if you keep them in mind, they will help you out in terms of just getting your statistics up a little higher. In baseball, if you're hitting 300 or 400, you are amazing. In networking with your outreach on LinkedIn, using InMail, I think the average response rate is somewhere between 10 and 25%. Not as good as baseball. And on MidtoMid, it's about 70% or 7 and 10. So much better response rate, but again, not 100%. All right, but let's take a look at a structured approach, but something that's real flexible that you can orient to your needs. We'll take a look at 8 principles and then we'll dive into each one. First one, have an interesting story, know your own value, and it's okay to have a little bit of humble swagger here. You are an expert in your fields or in yourself and what you're looking for. And you can know yourself, even if you don't have all the answers, at least know the parameters that you're exploring within. Research the company. You don't want to be doing your primary research when you first talk to the person. You should know what the company's involved in, and you should also know what the person's involved in and maybe what they've done before they're in the position they're in, and a little bit of their background. I want you to think about not just one-off conversations you're having with individuals, but also building up that advisory team, your board of directors. Generally proceeding by working up from people who are earlier in their careers to people who are more experienced. Ask really good questions that make people think. Offer up something of value, something memorable. And this doesn't have to be something big or magical. It might just be the value of an engaging conversation where the person recognizes, hey, I made an impact with this person. Thank them through an email immediately afterward. Show them that you're thankful throughout the conversation. And finally, as we keep saying, cultivate this as a relationship, something that is robust enough that you can come back to it from time to time, and not just this one-off at bat, especially for the ones that are really, really valuable as you proceed. But let's dig into each of these. It helps to have an interesting story and be able to say why you care, even if you don't have all the answers. So think about being able to articulate your interest in this field. Think about being able to demonstrate it, if not through an internship, maybe through a project. If not through a project, then maybe through an academic paper or some research that you've done. And if not through that, then your own research and homework, and kind of connecting the dots from different parts of your background. So come up with anecdotes or cases of kind of your fit with this, or that are demonstrable of what you've done in the field. And your goal is to show the other person that they're in good hands, that you're comfortable here with this conversation. In terms of what do you say, if you take a look on the CCI website, there's a networking guide. And if you take a look in MidtoMid and resources, there are networking guides that all give you some different frameworks for a personal introduction. Here's one that's really easy to use, and you can bend it and shape it in a number of different ways, but it can be as simple as 3 or 4 parts. Just, I'm a senior studying English, and something that you did got you interested in this topic. It's good to have a because for what reason, what your reason is, why you think it's important, maybe why it matters optionally, and then closing that off with something akin to, it's something I'm excited to pursue as a career. It's something that I'm excited to explore as a career, and I'm reaching out to you for some advice about it. So Kyle, I hope that this is something that maybe gives you some framing, even if you're not 100% certain which direction you're going to go in. But can you see yourself maybe bending this around, taking some of the stuff that you've done in linguistics and using it as a base to explore with the people you reach out to?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
All right, cool. And again, I'm happy to stick around afterward for specific questions and digging into this a little more. Okay, but let's move on. Those personal intros are easy to craft. It's good to practice them till they're maybe 20 seconds or so. If you're doing them over the phone, or a few sentences, maybe 4 sentences if you're doing them in an email. In terms of researching the industry and the company, one mistake that a lot of people make as they are starting to apply for jobs is they will take a look at an organization website, and if it's big enough to have a recruiting page or a description page, they will use that exact same language and not go any further than that. And I'll use uh, investment banking as an example here. Every investment bank is out to make money on behalf of its clients. That's what their job is. But if you take a look at their recruiting page, they'll say something like, we develop research-based solutions for market problems. And you'd be surprised at how many people in a first round interview or when reaching out say, why do you want to work at this bank? And they'll say, I really like the idea of developing research-based solutions to market problems. And it's kind of gobbledygook. It just shows that you haven't gone past one page of a website. And if you do, you're really distinguishing yourself from other people who are reaching out. So do yourself a favor, do a little bit of research on how the industry itself works. There are a lot of great resources for it. You can even look up industries and sometimes even companies on Wikipedia. But CCI, through its advisors and through its website, has a lot of industry-based resources where you can do some more of this research. Who are the key players? Who are the big organizations who are in the space? How do they make money? They're not just doing it for fun oftentimes, or if it is a not-for-profit organization, what is their mission and what's the mechanism by which they try to achieve it? What value, what perspective do they bring to the market? What is it that differentiates them from their competitors or from other people in that same space? And then what's new? So through Middlebury, you have free access to a bunch of great periodicals, including the Wall Street Journal. And you can look up what's happening with industries right now, or what's happening with particular organizations using library resources or just hopping on and using the journal. Finally, I think a good goal, and you might achieve this 100% or you might get halfway there, is to compile a little bit of a SWOT analysis. What SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's not like you're going to be asked for this in a call, but it's a great exercise to go through, take some of the information that you're digesting and be able to say, what are the strengths of this org I'm most interested in? Where are there opportunities for growth that they're possibly pursuing? Where are they weak? What threats are there to their business model? And again, all you're trying to do is digest that information a little bit so that you can be a little more conversant with someone who lives and breathes this every day. Okay, researching the person. This is when it's perfectly okay and you actually want to Google stalk people. You can use MidtoMid for that. You can use LinkedIn for that. We'll look at both of those briefly. Company websites are great for bios. And also, if you have friends who are interested in the same kind of space, if they have any data on people, this is a great time to ask around. Your goal isn't to know them inside and out, but your goal is to have a sense of what their career arc has been, how they describe themselves, and maybe be ready to formulate questions based on what you find. So if you found that you're reaching out to someone, and one example I use is one of our great alums, David Ellis, who worked for Star Industries for a number of years, got his MBA, and then is now working for Microsoft. A great question to ask would be, what prompted you to move into the technology space after working for Star for so many years? And how did you know you were ready for your MBA before moving in? Okay, and then continuing on, just a couple more with this framework are how to beat the house. One is building up your team, your advisory team. It's My advice with this, it's hard to go wrong by working up the chain. And what I mean by that is I would much rather see you making mistakes or being suboptimal in your conversations or stumbling a little bit with people who are early in their careers or fresh out of Middlebury before you reach up to some of the bigger guns, some of the leaders and managers in the organization. Oftentimes, that's something that is the norm. People who are higher up will sometimes ask who else you've spoken to at the organization. And oftentimes, you'll get ideas for additional contacts or additional questions when you are talking to someone who might be in a position to talk about job openings and hires and things like that. Um, as you do build this team, one thing that I would encourage you to do too is find occasions to check back in with them regularly. And we'll take a look at this in just a second. But one thing I'd encourage you to do is every person you talk to, ask them, is it okay if I follow up with you if I have another question? Or if like simply just to keep you up to date with my progress here. And if they say yes, and they almost always say yes, that gives you a great reason to reach out to them via email after maybe a week after, maybe 3 weeks after your conversation, and just share an update. In doing that, it kind of keeps that contact fresh and it makes it easier to reach back out to the person later down the line when you need something again. Really quickly on sequencing within your conversations. If you are not familiar with it yet, this is a real basic look at most organizations. Entry level people are really the doers. They're the analysts. They are processing vast amounts of information or working on a project level. They're great people to talk to about onboarding. So the interview process, tips for the interview, explore fit, ask them what their experience has been like, why they're there, what they like, what they don't like, what their advice is for you. As you get a little farther up into mid-career, oftentimes these folks are more in a position to make decisions and to manage teams. That means that they have a say in the hiring process or might be doing the hiring themselves. They'll also know the way the organization works and might be able to help steer you through a path. And then finally, your senior leaders are the folks who are running not necessarily people, but they're running the full org, in charge of whole divisions or teams. Their time is really valuable. So when you do reach out to them, and you should reach out to them, but when you do, the stakes are a little bit higher. So it's good to have your practice set in some of these earlier uh, kind of lower buckets within the organization. Great. So it never ever hurts to work from the ground up. Last slide on our framework, how to beat the house. And that last principle is just to offer them something of value. And as we said before, an engaging conversation where you're asking good questions, that gratitude and that thank you afterward. And what you want them to do is walk away thinking, wow, I really enjoyed this conversation. I could see myself working with Hannah or Kyle or Sam or Benji. Um, and you want that to be a prospect that's kind of alive in their mind. All right. So that's our framework. At this point, your wheels should be turning a little bit on those 8 points that we looked at. You should have a basic personal introduction, or at least have one framework to use to assemble one for yourself. You should have some leads on how to structure your research, and mainly think it's great to go just a little bit beyond from looking at the company website, and go a little bit deeper with generating good questions. And then the last takeaway from this section before we move on to the next is, as you're approaching this, your mental model should really be, this isn't just a performance when I'm trying to impress someone. This is you time. This is for you to be present and engaged. And if you are present and engaged, you're going to come across as more authentic, and you're going to have a lot more fun with these human interactions, not these performative interactions. But with that, let's take a look at the last section, and that is, what do you say when you're reaching out? What questions do you ask when you have the person on the line? And how are you kind of positioning yourself? Uh, in these emails, it's always good to spend a little bit of extra time so that you are making a case for yourself. You do have a because, and you really only have to accomplish four things. You want to give an overview of who you are, that kind of personal pitch, your reason for reaching out, your rationale. If you have some good ones, and they can be broad or general, an anecdote of why you're worth their time. And this is not an argument, it's more, I, I want to offer, show you that I have some value, or I have some potential here. And then finally, you want to be pretty precise in asking about setting up a call, not in terms of a specific date, but you want to have an ask like, could I get 20 minutes of your time within the next couple of weeks? What would that look like? Let's read through this quickly. This is our David Ellis, who was an alum within film and media culture. He went on to work for Star Industries, got his MBA, and then now he's working for Microsoft. And this might be what an outreach letter looks like to David. The first thing that we're doing is picking up on affinity, and we're saying, hey, I have the same major as you did. And not only that, but I'm interested in tech, and you're working in tech, so I wanted to reach out and talk to you. That's our first paragraph here. The second one, we're forming our rationale, or our reason why we're worth a bit of a look. And for this person, he worked at Techstars, a startup accelerator, for a couple of summers. He got some hands-on experience. He talks a little bit of shop in terms of the client that he worked with, just to demonstrate that he knows his stuff. And then he's saying, I walked away with this perspective. I really liked product launches, and it's something I want to do more in. And then closing off the letter, the turn to speaking with David. I'd love to be working on the kinds of teams, the types of projects that you're involved in. And I'd love to get your advice as someone who's younger in his career but has similar interests. Goes on to say, maybe we could talk about building a career in Microsoft. I've done some homework. I have an outsider's perspective, but I have some blanks to fill in. And then there's that ask, would you be amenable to a 20-minute call in the next week or two? And then showing, yeah, I'm flexible. I can work within your schedule. So if you write an email that looks roughly like this, as opposed to saying, I'm writing to see if there are any job opportunities at your organization, what do you think, just to yourself, the chances are that you'll hear a response? Probably a lot better, right? And they are a lot better. And I think with something like this, you'll be able to get your response rate up, not at the 10% that you might see on LinkedIn, but past the 70% even that you saw on MidtoMid. So let's assume that you've set up that conversation. What are you going to ask? All of this information, incidentally, is available in the resource section of MidtoMid. To look at it here, what I would say is think about your questions in 4 buckets. You want to ask questions that are kind of selfish for you. You want to ask questions about them to learn a little bit more about who they are as people and as professionals. Then you want to ask about the organization. And there are always some other categories, some questions you always ask. When it comes to your own purpose, you're looking for advice, and you can flat out ask that. So after you've described your situation, after you've heard a little bit about the org and them, you could say, hey, what are 3 or 4 action steps you'd recommend I take right now that you know a little bit about me, that are going to help me with pursuing opportunities in this field, or that are going to help me with this job that I saw was listed with your org? Are there other organizations that you've come to respect that you recommend I research in addition to yours? Or even more simply, what would you do if you were in my shoes? What would you do if you were me? On them, asking them what they wish they knew early in their careers when they were just starting out is often powerful, because you'll get the advice that they didn't follow, but they learned the hard way by not following. Absolutely ask what they love the most, what they find the most engaging, what it is that they're working on right now, or what they're most proud of in terms of the projects that they've worked on in the past year. And then also to get a sense of development within the organization, because you do want to signal that you care about your own learning. Ask how their role has changed over time and how you might expect an entry level role in that org to change over time. Just to round that out with our other two categories, in addition to self and the person, organization and other good questions. Um, Great to ask, what do you look for in new hires? Great to ask how entry level roles kind of fit into the org. What do they do? What do they offer in terms of value to the org? What types of projects are they engaged in? Opportunities for growth. What are the biggest challenges or what are the biggest opportunity areas within your industry right now? If you ask right now, you might hear about COVID pivot because most of the economy is still coming around and trying to figure out a new brand of digital engagement. It's a great question to ask, though. And what you can do with an answer like that is reflect on what's a potential solution. And if you do get as far as an interview at that firm, and and you can position yourself as someone who can offer that solution. And that might come up in an interview where with you saying, I had this really engaging conversation with so and so. One of the things we talked about in terms of challenges that are facing your organization right now are A, B, and C. And while I can't pretend to have all the answers, what I can say is I'm really interested in these things, and then here are some initial thoughts that I have. And I'm really interested to see that you're doing X, and Y. So in other words, what you're doing here is you are seeding yourself for future conversations and also getting a sense of the industry dynamic at the same time. In terms of other good questions, keeping in mind that this is always a team that you're trying to build, ask who else should I reach out to? And if they say, yeah, I have a really good person who you remind me of, ask, would you mind introducing me to that person over email? Would that be okay? Perfectly legitimate question to ask. And as we said before, ask the other person if you can keep them up to date on where you're at in your whole search. And ask if you can follow up with specific questions. By the way, all of this stuff is in the MidtoMid resource section if you want to take a look at it again. For the rest of this presentation, before we turn to LinkedIn and MidtoMid, let's talk about something that might very much be on your mind, and that's using networking to prospect around for jobs. This is something that is easy to do wrong. So this might be, if you're comfortable with all that other material, the most important part of this presentation for you. Just 6 quick principles. First, never lead by asking for a job, either in an email that's cold or when you first pick up the phone and talk to someone. It closes more doors than it opens. It'll make people feel used, and oftentimes they'll walk away thinking, gosh, this person didn't really care about me at all. This person cared about getting a job at my organization, and this was just this transactional exchange. So that email that we modeled, the one to David Ellis, would be a much better way to start that convo. You want them to see you as a good prospect, as a good candidate before you even start to dig in and ask this. And if they go there first in their mind, it makes your conversation a lot easier. Also, you don't want them to say no. If you write to someone and you say, I wondered if you had any openings at your organization, and they don't, what's going to happen? They'll probably write back and say, no, I'm sorry, we don't right now. And no conversation, no follow-up. It's just again a closed door. But if you do say you'd like to talk about their role, learn a little more about the org, hear about the kinds of candidates that they typically do hire when they're hiring, then all of a sudden you have this opportunity for a great talk. Finally, as we said before, keep in mind that you should call lower ranking people before senior executives so that you can get your mistakes done up front. And it also sounds really good in those later conversations to say, Yeah, I was able to speak to two of your researchers, or I was able to speak to one of your analysts who recommended I talk to a manager. And then now here I am speaking with you. If that's our little framework, if that's what to keep in mind, how do you ask for a job? Well, here are a handful of ways that you can bring it up in a conversation that aren't awkward. You can say, I'm exploring jobs and I wanted to get a sense of the kinds of candidates you typically look for at your organization. I'd love to work on a team like the one you're on, and I'd love to pick your brain on, um, what advice you have for me to get me there. I noticed that you're hiring for this position. I'm interested in applying, but first I wanted to reach out to you and discuss it here a little bit more. It was nice to see another Middlebury contact at the org, and I'd love to connect before submitting my application. Um, as part of our conversation, I'd be grateful to hear your advice on pursuing entry-level opportunities at your work. My overall goal is to work in your industry. I'd love to get your advice on developing myself as a candidate or otherwise breaking into the field. I know it's a hard market right now, but this is something that I'm committed to, and I'd really value it. And then last one in terms of a way to go, um, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that you're working on this kind of problem or this new direction. How would your organization staff something like that? What would it look like? And as you hear more about it, saying, maybe this is a big ask, but I'm wondering how I might get involved with something like that. If you're asking this way, the advantage is you're talking about a hypothetical situation. You're not asking a flat out yes or no question that they can refuse. And even if there's not a job opportunity there, you're getting a lot of information that might be helpful with that same org down the line, or you might be able to take and shop somewhere else. Okay. Last thing I would say, our seventh point that we're going to sneak in there before we go to the next slide is just ask if they can keep you looped in on openings if things do come up at the organization, or is there someone else I can contact to keep on a list or keep on someone's radar. Lastly, with here, always send a thank you. Within 24 hours, you want to send a thank you that refers to something specific in the conversation, something that you took away from it. So I really enjoyed our conversation about your role at Microsoft, what you do, and I got some really good advice for you about pursuing opportunities there. In particular, I really appreciate what you said about X, Y, and Z. I'm going to be sure to follow up on that, and I'll let you know how it turns out for me. Meanwhile, happy to stay in touch. I'm going to look for you on LinkedIn and add you as a contact. So I hope that we can stay connected that way. So it's not long, but it's a little bit thoughtful in the sense that you reflected on your conversation, you looked at the notes you took, and there you're at. Great. Lastly on that, if you had a negative experience, it's good to take responsibility. This is rare with our alums as well. Most of them are incredibly understanding. They want to see you be your best self. They don't look at this as a Broadway performance. They look at it as a conversation. In some fields, though, there are some hard cases. And if someone does tell you you're unprepared, this is something that's much more likely in finance than in other industries. Just take responsibility. And what I would recommend saying is in your thank you is something along the lines of, hey, one thing I took away in the call is my need to prepare more on X level. It's really an important lesson for me to learn, especially since I'm interested in this field. And so I wanted to thank you for taking the time to point that out. I'm taking it seriously. This is something that you can use in networking. Really rare that it comes up there. It's something you can use on the job if you flubbed a project or if something happened. So just maybe keep it in your back pocket that way. Finally, we have about 10 minutes left. I do want to say that within MidtoMid on LinkedIn, Middlebury alumni go into some really incredible organizations. They are studying at some of the world's best graduate schools. They're working in all kinds of interesting places. And many of them there, including the 3,700 who were on MidtoMid, have raised their hand as volunteers and said, I'd love to have you contact us. So what I'm going to do right now is stop my screen share, and I'm going to switch over from the presentation to get ready for LinkedIn and MidtoMid, taking a quick look. While I'm switching things around, any questions or anything that we should revisit or get back into? All right, you are either bored silly or I've done an amazing job at presenting what networking is. Hopefully it is the latter. Let me share my screen once again. We're going to take 2 minutes on LinkedIn and 2 minutes on MidtoMid. LinkedIn, we're not going to be talking about how to create a profile. Hopefully that's something that you've done. If not, it's super easy. And my only advice would be make sure you do have a headline, add your internships or work experience, and add a photo. Profiles like that are more engaging to hear from. They remove some of the variables, and it's easy to do that stuff. You can make an appointment with a career advisor or with a PCA through CCI, a peer career advisor, and they can help you out with that. What I wanted to show you is with LinkedIn. If you go to linkedin.com/alumni, it will pull up Middlebury College's page, and you can search within that for all alums of Middlebury College. Because that's not my alma mater, I'm going to get to it a second way. And we'll throw in Middlebury College as a search. It comes up straight away. We'll click on the company. And when you get to this page, you'll see that there are some handy analytics for where people go when they graduate and what organizations they work for. And we're going to access that not on their front page, but on alumni. What you'll see is that you can search by keyword. So you can search companies, you can search for individuals. You can change your year of graduation if you're looking for someone who is a little bit earlier, or if you know about when they graduated. And as you do searches, your returns will come up just below. Finally, it's pretty handy to take a look at these stats and see where people end up. If you have a dream of working for a particular organization, you can see where most mid alums go. Here we have 31 at Microsoft, 60 at Amazon, and as you click that, you'll get your returns in below these graphs. You can also do a search by major. So if you want to explore a little bit, so Kyle with linguistics, you could put that in here if it pops up. If not, you can do that on MidtoMid, and I'll show you that. And then you can also see what areas they go into. So if you're thinking really broadly, I know I want to work in the arts, or I know I want to work in media and communication, you can neck things down that way. So take a look in through here. It's a great way to explore and reach out to people. You can do the same thing on MidtoMid, and where the advantage of LinkedIn is it has a lot of scale, a lot of mass. The advantage of MidtoMid is everyone has volunteered to be on here, so they're expecting and they're hoping to hear from mid students. Where you want to go for this, if you haven't signed in, it's really an easy process. You can access your profile and make your edits using this button here, but most of your networking activity is going to be up here in MidConnect. And once this loads, what you'll see is you can run searches. These are all mid alums, of course. Incidentally, or excuse me, actually, we do have some mid parents in here who volunteered as well, and they can be really helpful contacts. When you do sign up, One thing that's different about MidtoMid versus LinkedIn is no one sees your profile, no one sees your searches until you reach out to that person. So it's a little bit more anonymous. So you can go ahead and click away on people multiple times. These are your filters up here. If I wanted to, and let's pick, well, we're going to keep picking on you, Kyle, with linguistics.
Funny story, it's not actually a major.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll do this anyway. And let's just take a look at who's on here. It's a relatively new major, so it's pretty small right now. But here are our returns. You could do the same thing for any other major or any other interest area. In addition to what you see up here, you can also search through all of these. So you could take a look by company. You could do a keyword search up here. And if affinity was important to you, you can go through and make selections based on gender, based on your own affinity groups, which you can see here. And you can even do geographic searches. When you do click on someone who you are interested in connecting with, it's really easy. First, their profile has all the information that you would find on LinkedIn. Additionally, you can search by help topic. So if you were just doing career path exploration, you could narrow down everyone who said, yeah, I'd love to talk about exploring different careers. You can see what industries they have. And one nice thing on MidtoMid is they've oftentimes answered these optional questions on their memorable classes and impact that Mid has made on them, what they found surprising or challenging while they were here. And you can kind of think of these as icebreakers or things that will give you a topic to talk about or a point of connection with that person. So you could increase your chances of this alum, Kristen, responding to you by saying, hey, what you said about what you found challenging about Mid really resonated with me because I found that too. If you wanted to contact her, just click the message button. You'll compose your message here just as you would with LinkedIn. This will go to her email, her Gmail. She can respond right from there. When she responds to you, it'll go right to your email as well. And so while you can use the MidtoMid platform, everything does go right to your Middlebury email. I want to stop there because we are right at 11:59. And I want to say thank you so much for joining us. If you take a look in your chat, you'll see that Ursula Allender, who is our director of advising, posted the PCA the PCA schedule. So you can take a look at when they're available. Like I said, I will stick around afterward if you do have questions. But meanwhile, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found this helpful. And if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out over email or just reach out to me personally. And thanks all.
Thank you.
Great, Kyle, thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Hannah and Laura, thank you both.
I had a specific question relating to networking within more research related fields, because a lot of what you were talking about was centered on companies which don't necessarily have the same structure as research